Welcome everyone to another Coptic Orthodox Answers podcast. Today we have quite the treat for you. We have a very special guest, a dear father and brother, Abuna Antony Paul. What a blessing to have you. I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks, Abuna. I'm awkward. It's good to be actually visiting again after living here for a bit. It's nice to return.
Yeah, we're definitely so blessed to have you back. And thank you for agreeing to sit with us today.
Thank you.
So you and I have had many conversations over the years, ever since we met each other several years back. But one conversation that has kept coming up between you and I over and over the years is how it is that when we speak of those who have achieved levels of holiness and righteousness, these holy men and women, that we're not just talking about those who are in the kingdom of heaven because they've departed. They also walk among us, and oftentimes we don't even realize to what extent we have spiritual giants in the church among us even today. And I remember how it is that you would share with me and you would talk to me about some of the people that you've encountered in your own life and how God has introduced you to these people for your own edification and for your own spiritual growth. So I wanted us to have a conversation specifically about that, and we'll bring up a few names that I think the audience might have heard of, but they might not know very well. But before we get into that, now, you were raised here in Canada, Kitchener, Ontario, right?
London, born and raised, and church was Kitchener. Yeah.
The church was in Kitchener. So let me begin by asking this question. How is it that a person who is, he doesn't have access to the monastic communities of Egypt and is born and raised here in Canada, how did you go about even discovering the monastic route or the monastic beauty, and how did that even come up in your life?
That for me was I think the most pivotal thing was actually the connection with the monasteries, because I originally hated the monasteries, or I hated is a strong word. It was my least favorite thing because I spent my summers in Egypt, in Armenia, and when we would go on church trips from Egypt, like if we go to Scandaria or to what's it called, Bursaid, we would stop at monasteries, and I'd get aggravated because it was just 100 million Ibn al-Lazis and like kissing relics and going, and I'm like, let's get to the trip part. But a close friend of mine who actually, funny enough, now lives in Canada, but he one time asked me if I wanted to go on a khilwa with him. And I don't know why I said yes.
What's a khilwa?
A retreat. Today we're calling conventions retreats, but they're not. Like retreat used to mean you're going for an isolation, to be alone, to go to a monastery, seclusion, quiet, etc. So he invited me to go, and I originally said I will not. I said yes, which I didn't understand why, and I said, but if I go, I will not go to St. Antony's with you. I'll go to St. Paul. And then he ended up not going, and I ended up going, and I ended up at St. Antony's, and it turned my world upside down, to be honest.
So for those in the audience who might not know the geography, or even what do you mean by St. Antony's Monastery, St. Paul's Monastery, can you talk about what those represent in the monastic community of Egypt?
So St. Anthony, the best saint, but he's his monastery, Diram Antonius and Diram Babula, are both Bahr al-Ahmar, the Red Sea governor in Egypt. And I think there's a link, like there's a lot of different regions have connections with different monasteries. So I didn't know at the time that Armenia has a strong connection with Ajurat Bahr al-Ahmar, of the monasteries of the Red Sea. So I don't know if that's the reason why there was a link between these, but I was going to St. Antony's Church in Armenia, which is where my friend, that's where I met him. So those are in the Red Sea, but I mean, St. Antony is the best saint and the best monastery. But it's the first monastery, obviously, in the whole world. So it has like Mekana Kibira, like has a huge place obviously in all monasteries throughout the world, but especially in Egypt, because it's the founding place of Egyptian and global monasticism. So there's a special thing to St. Antony's, and there's a special culture to St. Antony's that I think I got lucky to be able to see, because I think that's what drew me, was actually the holiness of the place, but the holiness of the people. And the way of thinking of the people was so new to me. and refreshing that it gave me confidence in my Christianity, actually.
But you didn't know any of these things before actually going. So what makes a Canadian young man being invited to go just do a retreat at a monastery say yes to something like that? And what would make you keep going back?
So I don't know. I don't know how I got to say yes. I don't understand it to this day. It was out of character. And it's funny because when my friend canceled, I thought that should have just made me cancel and not go, but I did.
Oh, he didn't end up going?
No, something I ended up going, he didn't. And so I'm just like, I found myself there as a stranger. I had no idea what the system was. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know I didn't know anything. I just knew that I needed a paper from the priest that I had and it was signed, but signed to the wrong monastery because I said I was going to go to St. Paul's. And about like an Egyptian ID that I didn't have. And so when I went, it was just, I'm just like, we'll just see. I had no idea what to expect. And there's no cell phones yet. So like, there wasn't even like a way of communicating with the family, like when I'm ending, when I'm coming and all that. But when I went, I didn't know where to start. Like it was overwhelming. There was a strict schedule that you had to follow, but the people, like it was, I don't know how to describe it other than I'm just awkward on camera, but like they were so joyful, which was surprising because I thought they were in prison, like with literally walls around them, no money, no marriage. Like
was this your view of what monasticism was? It was just
I knew very little. I'm like, they're supposed to be holy. That's all I know. But I'm just like, but it sounds awful. Like I was in a certain stage of thinking, like at the time, like when I was young, I loved the idea of it. But in Canada, we didn't see monks. Like our exposure to monks were only bishops, and the bishops were always visiting a short period. So
that's right.
There was Amber Weiss, who was an incredible man of God. But the association of the Konsoa was more of the bishop than it was monastery because that's who we saw.
Right.
And so I remember it was like on the first day, I was just following the group because I don't know anything. Like whoever's in the retreat house, because there's this whole nizam and a special place for those on retreat. So we went in, we prayed Vespers. And on the way out of the monastery walls, because Antony's the retreat house was in a different place than it is today, but it was near Madkhal where the Maktaba and the canteen are. But the ancient monastery has its own gate, so you'd enter through there. So when we're exiting, there's a whole bunch of people because there's also visitors. And there's this monk in a wheelchair, God repose his soul, Abuna Girgis. And I just followed everybody. So everyone went to kiss the man's hands. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know his name. I didn't know anything. And so when I kissed his hand like everybody else, because I'm just buying time to be going where they go, as I'm walking away, I hear him call out, Hamdulillah Salama. Yeah, and he said my name.
What does that mean?
So Hamdulillah Salama means like, it's a greeting of welcome, but it's not the greeting that you're going to say like when someone comes home from work. It means you've come from somewhere. Like it's not the normal welcoming greeting. So it can mean someone coming from a journey, which in the monastery is not shocking. Like everyone is coming. But I heard my name, but I mean, my name was extremely common in Egypt. So I turned around, like he might not mean me. So when I turned around, he repeated it, but pointed at me like directly to be like very clear, like I'm talking to you. So I was mind blown because I mean, it was the stuff that you hear in stories. I'm like, how does he know my name? I'm like, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. So there's a guy that was there that happened to also be from Armenia. And I'm like, hey, like that guy, like he's just said this. So he was like, okay, come with me to the canteen and like tell the monk that's there or whatever. So I go to the canteen. And the monk who's running the canteen at the time is now one of my closest fathers, like very dear to me. So we go in and he's like ready to serve us or get us stuff. And then he was like, tell him what happened. So I'm just like, that monk out there, like he knew my name, but he doesn't know me. Like he said this and this. And so when I was like, cool, like what does he look like? And so I'm like, he's wearing black. I'm like, I don't tell you. So I'm like, oh, he's in a wheelchair. And he's like, oh, that's Abuna Girgis. Yeah, that's ID. That's normal. And I looked at him just like, no, that's not normal. He's like, yeah, it is. But to him, it was such a non-fact. And I also didn't know that the supernatural was real because I loved the stories as a kid. But like once you start getting older, it's like, it's probably imagination, coincidence. they were tired, they were asleep, like you start to doubt that those things are real. But Abuna wasn't interested in that. Like he wasn't interested in like what happened with Abuna. He was just normal. And so he was asking me questions. What's Canada like? How do you think? We're having a great back and forth. He asked me if I wanted to go for a walk later. I'm laughing because I don't want to put him on, but I won't say his name. Because he was like, do you want to go for a walk? And I'm like, I do, but they lock us in the retreat house after 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. I can't remember what time anymore. But I was just like, so I can't. He goes, oh, they hide the key like under the plant by the door. It's just like, okay. Thankfully the gate was open because I probably would have died if I snuck the key. But we went on a walk. And I was not the kind to open up personally about myself, what I think, struggles, thoughts, ideas, all that kind of stuff. And I was also under the impression that righteous people are always crying. And that they have to always be talking about how they're dirt. Wait.
We got to give context. just in case we have audience who are not familiar with Coptic piety. This idea of I am dirt, I am a worm, I am nothing. Yeah. Can you maybe just give context?
My favorite tarneem, my favorite song at the time was when that was like, "Ana turab iftikri nafsi," right? Like, oh my soul, remember your dirt, and like the chorus is repeating. Don't forget your dirt. And I'm not saying there's not a piety to that. There's a piety to that. But I thought that's what I have to be
right.
A person of God, is to always be like head down and all of this. And so I'm expecting that from them. So I'm walking with this monk being like, I'm dirt. I'm filth. And he's giving me these looks like, I don't know what you want from me. And I even got emotional, which was very out of character for me. So I was like, I'm just dirt and I don't know how. And he was like, Fee, what's wrong? Like, what's going on? I'm just like, I thought we were supposed to say stuff like that. He's like, I mean, you might be dirt, like maybe. It's like, I don't know why you're talking about that. And he was like, and then he started talking about the love of God. And I had never heard anybody talk about the love of God, A, in that way, and B, in a way that I felt meant it and experienced it. It was different. It was different when someone, like when we say about Christ, he spoke as one having authority. When the people like saw something different in him, I saw that. I'm just like, this person means something else. And I was taken. And then this whole world opened up and I'm just seeing people doing tizbaha. I didn't know Coptic. I didn't know anything. And they were singing so joyfully, like, this is a terrible comparison, but I'm saying for a reason. You know, when you're on those bus rides and there's those shabi, those very folk songs that everyone joins in, right? Like in Canada, every little kid knows if you're happy and you know it, and everyone wants to join in and sing it, right? Egypt had their own versions. Tazbaha felt like that. Everyone was so happy and so into it that I'm like, I want to join them. How do I sing what they're singing? And I'm like, they were on cloud 9 and their joy was tangible. Everyone that was walking around was smiling. Everybody was saying something of value. And it was like everything that I had only known to be theory was happening. And so to me, it was like the analogy I sometimes use, I'm like, if you tell a little kid to just dribble, it's boring, right? But if they saw Kobe Bryant play, then it's like, oh, I didn't know that dribbling is part of the game and that you could play like that. So suddenly these little pieces that you get taught in Sunday school, whether it's prayer or fasting or anger or like insert virtue or vice that you're trying to grow or fight, was happening in real life and on some other level where I'm like, oh, this is different, right? It's one thing for someone to talk about prayer. It's another thing to see prayer. It's one thing to talk about somebody being joyful and seeing joy, talking about somebody being patient and seeing patience itself. But their interactions, their joy, and then on top of it, I'm like, there was no artificiality. And everyone was so different and it was all fine. There was the monk who joked. There was the monk who was quiet. There was the monk who walked like this. And there was the monk who claps you on the back and makes you food. But every single one of them was so visibly authentic to me that it made me have to step back and be like, I can't dismiss this. I can't dismiss, because I had my own dealings with doubt and stuff. of being like, I've now witnessed that it's real and I have a duty to do it, to try it at least. And so suddenly it became like school for me of being like, how come when I do this, I'm not like you? How come when I try and pray like this, I'm not hearing what you're hearing? How come I don't feel like, but now I could ask real questions to real people who are really doing it, that I know what they're talking about because they're doing it and it's alive and it's real. I came back from that first retreat. I went from there to St. Paul's for a couple of days. I think I was silent when I went back to Mir for like a week. Not because I just wanted to practice it. It was like I couldn't digest what I had seen. Like I'm like, it sounds so cheesy when I say it like that, but it was my whole world as I knew it meant something else. I'm like, I now know it to be real. I can't live the same way. It's impossible to. Sorry, I'm rambling. But,
no, not at all. You said this one line. You talked about how it is that you met all of these people, and you just ended by saying you can no longer live your life in the same way anymore. I know at some point you met a very specific person, and this is somebody that I would really love to introduce to our audience. He's now reposed in the Lord, and he's one of our fathers among the saints, Abuna Angelos, Antony. You talked to us about what Father Angelos meant to that monastery and how you encountered him.
So the monk that I met in the canteen, by whether coincidence or providence,
the one you walked with?
Yes, he was one of Abuna's closest disciples. So, and this Abuna that I first met, the one I went on the walk with, his language is obedience. His language is discipleship. So one of the things I had picked up with him very quickly was that everything he was saying was, my father taught me, my father taught me. One time I had this and my father taught me, and his father's Bunangiros. So inevitably there's all these sort of Bunangiros, but there's this other connection that was interesting because Bunangiros was serving in Armenia, and Safta Sharia. So he was already a thing in Armenia. So by fluke, actually, it was interesting because this is a side story, but a beggar in Armenia one time, like they'd be in church, they give you pictures of saints, they give you stuff, and like just like to receive like something that they're giving back something. So I didn't know this monk's name, but one of the beggars at the church had given him something, and he gave me this picture. It turned out to be Abuna Angelos. So when Abuna at the monastery was telling me about him and then shows me a picture, I'm like, oh, that's the guy, and I was so scared of his picture. But in this period, Abuna Angelos had just started. Abuna Angelos is obviously from Antony's monastery, but he had just recently began coming monthly back to the monastery to take confessions of the monks if they wanted. And so to the monastery, he was this elder that they knew of. He was somebody, he became a monk in 1955. So like this first monastery trip for me was in either 2000, 2001, wow. Right? So Abuna Angelos at this point has already been a monk for 45, 46 years. And he was originally in the monastery. He then served in Jerusalem. He served in multiple places and then wound up in Armenia. So to them, he's this monk that they know of that is one of the few elders of the monastery who had finally been willing to come back. So there was that. But Abuna that I met had already had a relationship before entering the monastery with him that continued. And so I was raised in a school, especially when Abuna was like, oh, he reads thoughts, he knows things, and all these things. I'm like, I was in a school of careful. Be super wary anybody that they're claiming about that might be doing these things, which is a good school of thought. The caution is good. So I actually originally had an aversion. So like when Abuna was like, here's the number of the guy who drives. Abuna didn't have his own cell phone, but he was like, here's the number of the guy who drives him. Abuna thought he was giving this big gift. Whereas to me, I'm like, I'm not calling him. I'm like, be careful, like is in my mind, which was again, not a bad thing to have. So I didn't see Abuna Angelos that trip, actually, that first one at all. I did the next time, when I went, the next time or the time after, actually, I don't remember, but, in a context of a big monk group, and I was petrified, because Abuna, like, I'll call him young Abuna or disciple Abuna. I want to say his name just because he's alive and in the monastery. I don't want to cause issues for Abuna, but he, or attention or warfare. But he was saying all these things about Abuna, and I'm petrified. He's like, come, we're going to sit with Abuna. And so I go into this room, there's like 30 monks in the waiting area because they're doing their confessions. And so I'm sitting there just scared. I'm like, I don't want him to read my thoughts. And I'm like, I don't think good thoughts. And so I'm like, what are you supposed to think when he's reading? And I'm just like, and what if he's not? So he came out to take a break at Bunangiros. And he had this known like posture. He had a knee up and his elbow would be like over it. And I'm watching him like look at the monks one by one. He's just going in the circle, and I assumed that he's reading their minds. Like, I don't know what they do. And so I'm just like, oh no. He's like, it's almost me. And so I'm like, think holy thoughts. So I started praying Jesus prayer. And I was like, at least that's religious. So I'm like, my Lord Jesus Christ, I'm like, but what if he doesn't understand English? And so I started like doing it in Arabic. And so then I was like, so I started in Arabic, and then someone's looking at, I look up, and he's just smiling. But whether he's reading my thoughts or not, I assume he was. He might not have, but I know that his smile undid me. I remember just sitting there quiet, watching him for his whole interactions, the small stuff that he said. And I understood that expression that people used to use when they'd be like, "Shufna al-Masih al-Nahada," today we saw Christ. And I'm like, I felt that, and it had nothing to do with the supernatural. It was like, no, it's like, I now identified as holiness, but it was like, you're not the same as us, and it's not anything you're doing or saying. There's something about you is different. There was the peace that I felt overflowing from him into everybody. It elevated everybody, his peace, his joy. Everyone that was in the room was alive. And it was coming through the grace that was in him. And I remember walking back with Abuna, the disciple, and just being like, I was silent. Again, I'm just like, I saw Christ, and it's not anything specific. And I wanted to just be as close as I could to him physically, wherever I could. Like, if there's a way to access, I want it, because he's real, he's alive. It was one of the most beautiful things. That was the first interaction with him.
So you got to sit with him that first time, but you never actually dialogued with him that first time, right?
I don't think so. I later on would, but I might have even the next day. But even the way he taught was very simple. But it was interesting, because the more I got to know Bunangilos over the years, because he says things that people have heard before. They're not necessarily new words. But it was funny, because you could ask him the same question more than once, but he knew what state you were in to know what the answer you needed was, right? Like, I remember one time sitting with him being like Abuna, I'm arrogant. Like, I want to be humble. And he wasn't the person to be like, okay, Saint so-and-so said this, and give you a discourse of Saint so-and-so. Like, that wasn't his. Like, it was always very simple, very short, very brief. And he just like, Habbal Kul, right? Love everyone. And then he zoomed in, and he just like, you need to see everybody as greater than you, which is not necessarily even the definition of humility. But he knew that me specifically, that was what was going on. That there were people I looked down on. And so that was the obstacle to me attaining humility. So it might be a different answer if it was a different situation.
So I'm curious, at what point in your encounter with him did you feel like, at what point did you transition from clairvoyance is the scary thing that I should be weary of, to suddenly seeing it as something that could be beneficial to you and your relationship with Christ?
Well, almost right away, because like in the seeing Christ thing, I'm like, so there's this famous encounter like St. Peter with our Lord, right? Where when Christ does the miracle, there are people who are excited and partying, like, we got fish. St. Peter's response is, get away from me. Like, there's these two different ways that can react to it. I was expecting, because my general disposition when I'm around holiness is actually go away, usually. Because I'm like, because of the self-awareness, not because I don't like the holiness, but of like the mirror, the light that gets shone on you. With the Bunangiros, it was the opposite. I'm like, that's why I felt Christ. It was just like, I'm not afraid to be known. Like instead, I feel comforted that you see me and you're not repulsed and you're showing me love. And now I'm comfortable to say, how do I be healed? Right? How do I look like Christ? Because you look like Christ. So what did you do to get to look like Christ? I want that.
Right.
So that to me, that happened almost right away, where the clairvoyance became a blessing of being like, well, there's no need to act. You can see it. You know that I'm jealous. You know that I'm looking down on someone. You know that I have these vices, but you're not treating me differently. So since you already know and you see my symptoms, doctor, heal me. So it became like, what's the prescription? And it became actually the most comfortable place to be instead of the opposite.
That's beautiful, because even in the parallel that you're making between what you experienced and what St. Peter experienced with Christ, although he begins with this demeanor of depart from me, O Lord, for I'm a sinner, or I'm a sinful man, it's the same Peter who later, when Christ in John chapter 6 says, do you also want to leave? His response is, where are we to go? Yeah. You are the one who has the words of life. Yeah. So there's this beautiful parallel in how it is that once embraced, like you said, it gives life. I'm curious, other than all of these spiritual giftings, because we sometimes make the mistake of thinking that what makes a holy person holy is the fact that they have access to like spiritual gifts or the supernatural or this or that. But you actually knew Abuna Angelos. And if I'm not mistaken, you've already talked about how it is that you find yourself honored to even be considered one of his children, one of his sons. So you know him. What makes him holy? Is it the fact that he could do these supernatural things? Or what, when you see his holiness, what is at the source of that?
It's just the godliness. No, the gifts to me were I'm not gonna lie, it was cool. Like for lack of a better word, of course it is. Everyone, people are dying to experience things like that with him. But he wasn't about that. That's what was interesting. It wasn't his conversation on the norm. It wasn't how he thought. It wasn't how he was. To me, I was mind-blowing that he was somebody pursuing God truly. And if there were gifts, it was more of a consequence, not a cause.
Can you explain that? What does that mean?
That a person who is faithful, Christ said, he's like, he who is faithful with little, I can make you Lord over much. So the person who is, so Abunagiros, for example, when he was a monk, I heard stories from some of the elders that I loved where I asked one of his closest, he was his brother, and I asked him, Abuna Suleiman, God oppose his soul. I asked him, like, what was Abunagiros like in the monastery? And he was like, and Antonians are known to just give it like it is. And he was like, he was irritating. And he was like, sometimes we wanted to hang out, but Abunagiros was adamant that he needed to read his Bible and do his qanun. So he'd be in his cell, and we know that. And we'd be calling it Abunagiros, and pretend he's not there. And we know he's in there and he's doing his prayers. And he was just like, just come out. And like, but Abunagiros, he was faithful, like even in something like that, right? So a person who is faithful with little, God can make faithful over much. So if he's entrusting the care of human beings under him, right, then he feels the duty to be faithful in his own spirituality, but he also feels the faithfulness in those that he serves. So if our Father is saying, I'm letting you take care of these kids of mine, forgive the analogy, here's an extra allowance to distribute to my kids, right? That's what I'm saying, it's a consequence. That because he's doing it, because he's taking it seriously, that God is saying, distribute to my kids these things for the sake of their healing, for their life, for their growth, right? That like my kids need this, I trust you. Yes, take care of my kids. So that's his consequence, where it's just like, okay, he happened to receive these gifts, right? Amberes, for example, we don't talk about him as having miracle working. We talk about his teaching, right? We talk about his spirituality, his peace, his virtue. That was another way of responsibility to his children, right? And it was a whole other way of faithfulness. And those were also spiritual gifts. We just tend to think of gifts as only the supernatural looking ones, but these were too. So Abunagiros happened to have many of that kind. But for him, if there was somebody endangered, if there was somebody in poverty, I remember one time going to Minya to see him on one of the trips, and the guy driving us from the edge of the Qaria to the church, who was a Muslim, was like, our whole village is living by the blessing of that man. He was like, he feeds the mouth of every human being in this place. And he was singing doxologies of Bunangiros, of just being like, we're living by his blessing, we're living by his prayers. The Muslim and Masihi, the Christian and the Muslim, both, we live by him. And he was just so faithful. So for me, it was always about him pursuing. I remember hearing him say one time, muttering. And that's when like he was always pursuing, just muttering, Ya Rab, anqidhni min al-birri zati. Lord, save me from self-righteousness. And I'm like, you? Like, you think you're self-righteous? And I'm like, then what am I? But at the same time, like, regardless of the comparison, you're attentive to your own state, right? Was the lesson I took from it. That there's never a time to relax and think, I'm there, right? Like, it was there even in that. And so it's something that, like, he was so faithful is the best word, and complete denial of will, that I think God entrusted him with gifts, as opposed to God gave him gifts that made him holy, and people came as the complete reverse of that.
So when I originally asked you that question, your immediate response was godliness. And in this conversation, you spoke about Abuna Angelos and his faithfulness to his canon, to his Lord, his love for Christ. You brought up Bishop Ruiz, who is now reposed in the Lord. There's also other people who, in modern day, we celebrate as people who are extremely godly and faithful. People like Abuna Fanus, Abuna Faltaos. These are all people who, or even Abuna Justus Antony, who Father Justus is. Abuna Angelos would have.
They're contemporaries.
Yeah, they're contemporaries, right? And Abuna Justus is already a canonized saint in the Coptic Orthodox Church. But why did you use godliness when you describe the source of that holiness that then unlocked the additional gifts and that allowance that you spoke of? What does that mean, godliness?
Being the image and likeness of God, right? That's what it is, right? The true piety, the mystery of godliness is to conform to the image and likeness of God. To be like, repentance is to continually change my mind to be in accordance with the mind of God, which is to then look like God. It's to be meek. It's to do Matthew 5-7, right? And that was the language of all these monks, right? Like when I would go around the monastery, I felt like it was a university. Like I remember I'd ask questions like, "Hey, I think I want to help with jealousy," and then they'd ask me questions because they're all in the pursuit of godliness, right? So they'd be like, "Why do you think you're jealous? What's the story that makes you think that?" I'm like, "Well, because there's this guy and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5." Right? So then their response would be like, they'd have these right questions because they're living in it, right? Like in this pursuit of it. And they're like, "I don't think you're jealous." I'm like, "Well, what am I?" And like, "You just don't like that guy." And they're like, and that's not good either. But here's the treatment. So then these elders are the ones that have been diseased, right? That's why Antonian monks, like especially, are not afraid to tell stories of the mess ups. Right? Like they're excited to tell the funny stories of how they were wrong, because it was part of the becoming healthy or becoming godly, right? So like even when Angelos would be hilarious when you talk about when he was like the guy I was strong. And he goes, and one time somebody was being rude to Abuna Justus, and he was like, and I was gonna punch him. And I'm like, and many people would be scandalized by hearing that, and Abuna Justus had no shame saying it. He's not like, "Oh, everyone thinks I'm a saint, I better not say that," right? Like he was just like, no, I wanted to beat him up. Who is he to talk to Abuna Justus like that? Who Abuna Justus at the time was just his friend, right? They weren't thinking of Abuna Justus as the saint that's now canonized. This was his colleague, right? And he was just like, and he goes, and Abuna Justus broke his silence and grabbed me by the arm, and he was just like, "It's none of your business." He was like, he's like, "It's not your problem, it's mushkiltak." And he was like, so imagine to Abuna Angelos, like this was an event worthy of Abuna Justus breaking his silence, like to do, right? And then they would talk, like their stories are hilarious. They would talk about, there was one elder, I can say the story now, he's reposed, that told me the story a few years ago. He was one of the elders of the monastery that lived in Bush, but he used to be the Kanaisi. He was in charge, responsible for the church, and they have to lock all the churches after the prayers. And Abuna Justus had this custom where after service was done, he might go around the church just muttering psalms to himself for a while. And Abuna's like, I want to go to my cell. I'm hungry and I'm tired. And Abuna Yusuf is just, and he's like, and you don't think of Abuna Yusuf as being ghilis, right? Like, but to Abuna Kinaisi, he feels like he is being annoying. He's like, I want to go home. And so he was like, Abuna, finish. I want to go. And he was like, Abuna just looked at me, smiled, kept going. And he goes, Abuna, if you don't finish in 5 minutes, I don't remember what he said, like time-wise. He's like, if you don't finish, I'm going to lock you in here. I'll do it. And so Abuna just keeps going. And he goes, so I locked him in. And he goes, I just locked the door and I left. And so he was like, I go to my cell, and he goes, I forgot. Like, this was morning liturgy. He goes, the day passes, the whole day goes, I sleep, I eat, I rest, and it comes for evening prayers, and I need to go to the church to open before the monks arrive. And he was like, and on my way, I'm like, oh no.
I forgot.
Because these are these slide wooden locks that go into a groove in the wall. Like, there's no way out. There's no phones. This is the 70s and 80s. The 70s, when he used to start in the 70s. And he was like, I was scared. He goes, because Abuna Yusuf was also strong. And he goes, I walked near the door, and he's like, Abuna Yusuf, I'm about to open the door. I need you to know, I actually forgot. And he goes, this was not on purpose. I honestly forgot. And he goes, I opened the door, and Abuna Yusuf was just on the floor, crouched with his pose, just going. But even to hear that, like, those stories, instead of just like he glowed, which are also true stories, like Tamavirini saw him glowing, right? But I'm just like, but these stories to me made me comfortable in the pursuit of righteousness, being like, that Abuna's like, yeah, I was a jerk. Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Abuna Yusuf was sha'i, he was mischievous. Like, there's these aspects of humanity. I'm like, this is really cool that I'm allowed. Basically, the Antonians, I feel, in this pursuit of godliness, to link it was just that we're in this pursuit of becoming holy, and we also have a distinct personality. And this is okay, right? The whole be yourself, don't sin, the very Antonian, he who knows himself knows God, was this sense of have your character and don't do wrong with it. And so even in the stories that included wrong, there's a still sense of, and you're allowed to be your own personality. Like Abuna Angelos was sha'i. Like, most people have the image of the elder Abuna Angelos in the late days, like sitting in a chair, advising, praying, blessing, healing, like all of these things. But like, that was after decades of this, right? Is that he wound up there and increased in faithfulness, and God increased him. But that it was a sense of, I'm allowed to be me, growing. I'm going to make mistakes. I shouldn't want to make mistakes or make mistakes on purpose, but I'm going to. And am I going to be healed? Am I getting instruction? Because when they tell these stories, there's a message behind it, being like, and it taught me this, right? And my eyes became open to this. And so then to use your example, so that you can arrive at a one-day St. Peter example of where would we go, right? Like, that's like, how can I not pursue this? How can I, having tasted health, want to be sick? How, having tasted God, can I desire to be a sinner? I am a sinner. How can I want that if I have tasted God?
So, to put us back into context, here you are, young Canadian man. You're visiting Egypt twice a year?
Once a year.
Once a year. And while you're there, you've now met some really beautiful people. That young priest disciple who you first encountered. You've now encountered Abuna Angelos. You've seen his holiness. You've seen how real he is as a human being. You've seen the giftings that the Holy Spirit has granted him. At what point did your relationship with Abuna Angelos point you towards this idea of, I want to be a part of what they're a part of?
I think it was right from the beginning. Because when the whole world was turned upside down, it was just a sense of, this is real and I want in. And then the stories that you'd hear from the Tetas and Giddos became reality. And then I saw that the effort put in was met with grace. And I saw that Abuna Angelos cared for me. I'm nobody. I'm proud to be associated with him, but I feel presumptuous to call myself disciple. I am on some level, but no, I'm not. I was not. I can't be like, oh, and I lived with him and I did this and this. I'm like, I should do, I did, but I'm like, but to feel his care, because the more we got close, the more he was attentive, and then he could call things out, right? Of being like, "Khud ta'ala," like, and there'd be a specific lesson, or if there was a mood, there'd be something. There'd be blessings, and there was reprimand, and there was consolation. Like there was that mix of both. But then I also saw that it was easier to get the responses because there was an openness of heart. Like of just being like, I'm no longer holding you guys under trial, right? Because the skeptic in me, especially as a Westerner, of being like, but what if it's just this? But what if it's just this? And how come blah, blah, blah? When that started to diminish and just being like, I don't have to understand it. And I'm still being discipled, so there is someone protecting me, right? I'm just like, but there was, I don't know what I'm answering, but I don't know if I'm answering your question, to be honest with you, but that was always there. It just grew and grew and grew. And so I got to see more and more and more, because once the heart is no longer resistant, that world becomes a little bit more open and more clear.
No, you're definitely answering the question. I think what I'm hoping the audience is going to pick up on, and maybe you could just comment on it, is long before you were ever ready to put a label on Abuna and Gillis and say, this man is holy, this man is a saint, it is because you encountered him, it is because you had relationship with him, and that you desired to follow in the footsteps that you saw in front of you, that your relationship with Christ then called you into deeper and deeper things. And I think the whole purpose behind our conversation to begin with is not just to sit down and talk about like the supernatural effects and the miracles of people who are holy. This is so much more about how it is that we also need to seek out people who are holy around us, so that we may be inspired by the Holy Spirit working in them, so that we can be infected with the love of Christ that we've seen in them. You brought up the young priest, the young monk, who everything he told you was constantly, my father taught me, my father taught me, my father taught me. And here he's pointing back to Abuna and Gillis. I feel like discipleship is something that we are not pursuing aggressively enough in order for us to become holy. And I'm curious, was that part of the culture that you saw at St. Antony's monastery?
100%. Till this day, like, I'm now a priest and a monk, etc., and I never view myself equal to them. No matter what rank, I'm like, no, these are our fathers. And it's not about the age, not about anything, it's the who they are. But I do think that, if I can rant for a minute to your point of just being like, no, the lack of discipleship, I think, is the biggest disease right now. There's, like, I was at a youth meeting just a few days ago, and we're having this discussion, like the post-meeting, just hang out with some of them, and someone saying, what would you do if a youth is going through blah, 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 blah? Because we're used to all these problem-solving things, and like, he needs to be attached to a holy person and cling to him. Because I feel like we've started to resort to systems as a church of just being like, here's the Sunday school system. Here is the liturgical system. I'm not talking about the sacramental life. I mean, here's the rules. Here's who's going to be ma'alim. Here's what time you do. All those matter. I'm not diminishing from them. I'm just saying, but we've made everything reductible to that. Here's the curriculum. And every single one of these pieces matter. We just forget that the non-living of it is what kills. Seeing it alive is when you get life, right? That's like that's why, like what I said at the very beginning, I'm like, but I'm doing those things, but I'm not you. Why? I'm like, how come doing the same things is not resulting in the same thing? And the only reason I was aware it wasn't was because I saw it alive. To be like, but I'm not alive. And I'm like, because I'm not that. Whatever this is, I know I'm not that. And so it changes the conviction, because our lack of discipleship is resulting in a lack of experience. And so the lack of experience has reduced faith to theory, right? And so then we're giving all these incredible lectures on concepts and very little on how to live it, right? So in these monks, like in Abuna and Gillis, when he prays, right? So like, okay, so prayer does something. I saw it.
What does that mean?
Right?
Sorry. Because you changed your facial expression. Well, what does that mean to say when he prays?
I don't know how to describe it. I saw a man who prays, and I saw a man who heaven listens to, right? Like I am like, if like I know I've said this publicly before. There was an incident that happened with a very close relative. I'm just not telling this public because there's a lot of people who might watch this. That was going to like a lawsuit, and I'm using this as an extreme example. When I say he prays. I don't always mean the miraculous. This happens to be miraculous. And he was like 3 days. First of all, he already knew the story before I finished it. But he's like, 3 days. And I'm like, what? And he goes, in 3 days, hatikhlas. And so like, whether it was because he had foresight, whether it's because he was confident that in asking God truly, that God would grant. I don't know and I don't care. I know that in 3 days, it miraculously was resolved in a way that made no human sense to those involved who didn't even know that Ibn Angelos was praying. And so like it was those things, but it's like, no, that man prayed, right? When we talk about peace and you look at something like Ambaris, that was real, right? When Abu Angelos with his piercing eye could discern a human being and be like, this person is lying. I'm just like, and the person would confess it. Like where I'm just like, and then leave the interaction hugging Abuna for being called out on lying. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. But I'm like, but when you see those, it's just like, so when we're having something about prayer, I'm like, yeah, sure, okay, we should pray. Here's what you do in prayer. There should be praise, there should be thanksgiving, there should be intercession, right? And we add these things. Those are all true, right? Like those are all true. It's like, but how do I live that? When we're telling somebody, like, you need to be patient. Why? It's not random because it is to be in the image and likeness of God. If I'm to be pure, I need to be pure even as God is pure. And purity doesn't just mean chastity. Chastity is just one kind of purity, right? So then it's just like, how do my eyes become clean? So when these people are saying, you're seeing your brother wrong, right? When he's saying the reason that you don't have humility is you're seeing wrong. You're looking down on someone. You will never be humble when you view yourself elevated above your brother. Then these other old monastic sayings come in where it's like, but in real life in the 21st century, of being like, oh, right? And then suddenly it means something. Right. When another monk, like this mix of supernatural and natural, where he called me in the middle of me having a struggle with a particular sin. And he happens to call, and the guy didn't even have a smartphone and he's paying for it. He's like, Abuna Habib Albi, this monk is reposed, so I can say it. I'm like, yeah, Abuna. And he's just like, are you struggling with such and such? I'm like, yeah. And he was like, oh, Habibi, don't worry. And he's like, can I tell you why most people, he didn't want to say why you're struggling with it, why most people suffer from this? I'm like, please. And he starts listing the causes of this sin. And as he's listing them, honestly, there's like a movie playing in my head of me doing every single one of those things. And at the end of it, he goes, him? I'm like, do you understand? I'm like, I understand. Because there was this teaching about how directly my sin is causing this disease, right? And so now these lessons about not judging, about making excuses, about trying to justify my neighbor, about seeing the good in others, about whatsoever things are true, pure, lovely, worthy, repute, think on, like, now they're not a random lesson. I saw it alive in a holy person to understand what health looks like, and health is to be as God is. So I can say, I want to be like God, and thankfully God has given us these teachers. They're never substituting God. They're pointing me at him, and they're never ambiguous about that, right? None of them are like, Busilli ana, right? They're not like, look at me. They were saying, look at him, and they never saw themselves as anything.
So I'm curious, somebody hears what it is that you're sharing right now, and they're like, that's beautiful. You just made a beautiful case for discipleship and the importance of how faith is not transmitted through theory, but faith is transmitted through discipleship and encounter and real living. You know, this tradition that is passed down by these people being around us in this example. But I'm not going to Egypt and I'm not going to St. Antony's Monastery every summer. I'm not about to do that. I don't have the means to do it. Not to mention that it's not like Abuna Angelosus don't grow on trees. Right, so it's not that accessible. Unfortunately, the church is definitely producing. Glory to God. But what would you tell a person who would make that argument and say, I don't have access to this, therefore discipleship is not an option?
the spirit of discipleship is as important as who you're disciple to. The pursuit of wanting to be taught is monumentally important. The seeking of discipleship, God can speak through everybody. We have lots of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, it doesn't have to be a saint, an acknowledged saint. I'm like, we have saints among us. I'm like, for it to be discipleship. That's why I'm like, there's a chain, there's a handing down. We have priests, we have servants. I'm like, but every priest, every servant, every human needs to themselves also be being discipled. So each one is being like, what am I doing to learn? What am I doing to show that I'm poor in spirit, that I need to receive, that I'm not the one who knows, I'm the one who needs to get.
Yeah.
And that from what we receive, that we can hand down. We have books. Are we reading those books to learn and say, how do I live this? What is the importance of this? That mindset in and of itself, no, God will never forsake anybody who's seeking. Right? So if one is seeking truly, these saints help alert us that we need to seek. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten to spend time with Evangelos. An encounter with him was enough to say, I need that. Right? Like, even if I hadn't got to have post that, I knew that I discovered health, and now health is alive.
Right.
So we need to, as servants, impart that need, like that sense of need to others, and feeling the need ourselves. If we are constantly doing both, everything is alive, everything's well. We have access, but this has to come alive. The theory has to meet practice.
That's right.
Right? And I think we've only focused on theory. They need to merge, and then that becomes the living Christian.
And if I could rant, there's people who seem to speak of the church as if the church was bankrupt. I don't know what reality you are in, but the church that I belong to is far from bankrupt. Our mother, the church, is so incredibly wealthy with the life-giving Holy Spirit that is like working in people incredibly. And here I'm not just talking about like the monks and the nuns, and I'm not talking just about our fathers and metropolitans or the bishops. I'm not talking even about the clergy. There are so many people that you can learn from, so many people that you could sit at their feet. And it's funny because we're talking about the monastery that you fell in love with, the saint that you could calling the greatest of saints, St. Antony. And St. Athanasius makes this claim in the life of Antony, where he talks about before going into the inner desert, he goes and he lives among a community of elders.
Yeah.
And Athanasius says that like a prudent bee, he would go collect the nectar of every one of the flowers, right? He would go sit with one of the elders and learn humility from one, learn patience from another, learn charity and love and forgiveness. And he would collect all of those until he was second to none of them. He had not only acquired the virtue, but even surpassed them in their capacity to practice that virtue. So that spirit of discipleship that you speak of, well, we have this community. We have this community of holy men and women. I think immediately of the elder tetas, the grandmas, who are first pew in all of our churches. Those men who, if you walk into church on a random evening, they're dusting the pews, they're making the holy bread for tomorrow's liturgy, they're serving in like incognito. Those are the people that we should pursue. If you have a very holy clergyman in your parish who is unbelievably busy, and the metropolitan or the bishop are unbelievably busy, you don't have to be just disciple to them. They have discipled people, and you can be disciple to their disciples. The church is not bankrupt, I think, is basically what I'm trying to say.
And the person who says that, to use that teaching of Evangelos, they're viewing wrong.
Yeah.
The person who says that views themselves as rich, because the only way to assess poverty is if you think you have. Like, so to assess it is to presume. A person with the spirit of discipleship won't have the thought. The person with the spirit of discipleship will just say, here I am, teach me.
Yeah. Before we conclude, I want to ask you one last thing about these beautiful people that we're speaking about. Whether it be Abuna Angelos, Abuna Ruiz, Abuna Fanus, Abuna Yostos, any of these people, you've mentioned even Tamav Irini, Mother Irini. All of them seem to have relationship with the kingdom. All of them had a relationship with saints. And I think Abuna Angelos was especially known to have a relationship with the Holy Mother, Saint Mary. Talk to us about that and whether or not it is something that we should build also.
Absolutely. I think the analogy that I like to work from, just to make it simple, is everyone's family, right? If we start viewing the saints as members of the kingdom, members of our family, Forgive the language, like it's Uncle Saint Poprolos, right? Like it's Tant Umina Irini.
Right.
Like just as a way to understand it, being like, and God in His love allows us to interact with all of the family. We need to understand that there's a different relationship between us and Dad, right? Between us and our Heavenly Father, than with our uncles and aunts. But the beauty is that they all knew Dad very well, and so we're going, and they love us very well, in Him, through Him, and all of it, right? And so the closer we get to each other, the closer we're also getting to God, and we're learning from other family members. How did you get to know Him in this way? How did you please Him in this way? How did you get over this thing that we know He doesn't like because I'm doing it too? Mm-hmm. So our connection to them will be on all these different levels. And there are relatives that we meet by circumstance and get to know. There are relatives we meet because we have a common struggle. There are relatives that we meet because we just happen to be in the same room. There's all these reasons why we connect with different family members, and they're all good reasons. And they're all serve a purpose. As long as we understand it in the context of the kingdom, all of it becomes life-giving.
Yeah. Thank you, Una. I know you and I could probably go on for a little bit longer, but I'm really happy that we had a chance to be able to discuss these holy people who inspire us. And I'm really happy that we had a chance to be able to invite people to be able to pursue that level of discipleship that might be able to inspire them to pursue lives of consecration just as you did. I'm not saying they should become like you. I am saying I hope they are just as inspired by the holy people as you are. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Truly a blessing.
Pray for me.
The Lord is with you, Father. Praise me.